Good evening or good afternoon. Welcome to the Blavatskyhouse, the headquarters of the Theosophical Society, Point Loma. Today is the first talk of our new lecture season, and we have tried to put together a varied program covering many facets of theosophical thought, such as life and death, karma, evolution, compassion, conscience. Please check our website for the full program. As was the case last year, there will always be a talk followed by a study on that talk. And for that study you have to sign up on our website, and then you will be sent a few pieces of literature on the subject, which can help you to go further into the topic. And we will send you, of course, the Zoom link so you can participate. Today we begin with a talk on universal wisdom. And this has a special reason, because this season we also start our new course which has the same name, Universal Wisdom. We have already had a trial run in the Dutch version, and although the course is profound, we found that the students were able to follow it well, and we thought, therefore, we should offer the course Universal Wisdom also in English. If you are interested, check our website for information, or send us an email or call if you would like further information. The course will start in January, so you have a little bit of time to think about it, but we can recommend it. The course is much needed, we believe, given the current state of humanity. We think the theosophical ideas are desperately needed in our society, because the problems humanity has caused itself seem so great that many people see no way out. I assume that, like me, you read the newspapers or otherwise are aware of what many consider to be disturbing news events, such as the global warming climate, factory farming, the loss of biodiversity. But it's certainly not only the environment that is of great concern to us. What about the wars, the many wars in Europe and Africa, the gap between rich and poor, and the gap between rural and urban, the flood of refugees, which many also see as a problem? And I'd better not go on, because then you might become even more despondent than you already now may be. Now, in our opinion, there is no reason for despondency. And why not? Because all these challenges are solvable. We, as humanity, have the potential and the abilities to bring all these problems to a solution acceptable to everyone. But then we have to start thinking in a different way. We have a tendency, and now I paraphrase Albert Einstein, to solve problems with the same way of thinking that caused them. What kind of thinking is that? We see problems as isolated phenomena. We don't see the overarching mindset, the overarching mentality that causes them. It's a view of life associated with the current psychological state of humanity. The general vision of life is that we see all phenomena as material things, like things accidentally brought to life. We don't go into that in depth, because we would rather devote our attention to that other way of thinking, which is phenomena in a large context, and has as its premise that behind every phenomenon, behind humans, animals, plants, atoms, stars, planets, you name it, there is life or consciousness. We're going to explain that in a moment. We're going to try to explain this universal way of thinking in two talks. In doing so, we ask you to put aside all your ideas for a moment. Assume for a moment that you are a child and know nothing. This is not a disguised form of indoctrination, not at all, because we don't want to present this universal way of thinking as a belief or a dogma. We present it to you as a hypothesis. Of course, we will then try with arguments and examples to support that hypothesis, but ultimately it's up to you to say yes or no, or you say maybe, which is also possible, of course. Well, we claim that there is one truth, one absolute, all-encompassing, boundless truth. Truth with big, fat, capital letters. You can, of course, immediately claim that there are a lot of truths, and then you are right, but those are relative truths, derived truths from the one absolute truth. Can this absolute truth be known? Yes and no. That's a political answer, you might say, but if you be patient for a moment, we'll explain. That absolute truth is based on three core ideas, three principles or fundamental propositions. Note that those three fundamental propositions are not articles of faith or dogma about which you are not allowed to think. On the contrary, they are meant to be thought about. Think of them as hypotheses which must prove their value and truth in the practice of life. So, you must test these three fundamental ideas, yes, constantly test them, and then they must hold true in all circumstances, everywhere and always, where they must be able to explain everything. What are these three fundamental thoughts? The first one is the boundlessness that we will cover in this section of the talk. Cyclicity is the second one, and this will be covered in part 2 of the talk. And 3, fundamental equality and growth, and this comes in part 3. So the first idea is boundlessness, and boundlessness refers to everything. So grasp it in the spatial sense, infinite space, but also in the sense of time, or actually I should say duration. There is an infinite duration, but also in the sense of possibilities and abilities. They are also infinite. In H.P. Blavatsky's magnificent book, The Secret Doctrine, this boundless truth is spoken of as a principle, an omnipresent, eternal, boundless and immutable principle on which all speculation is impossible, since it transcends the power of human conception and could only be drafted by any human expression or similitude. One absolute reality which antecedes all manifest conditioned being. And do you understand now why we just said that this truth cannot be known? The principle is beyond our comprehension. You see, we are dealing here with a boundless truth, and boundlessness cannot be fully understood by a limited being such as a human being. If you only think of the universe, the vastness of the billions of stars, can you imagine it? Thanks to all kinds of modern telescopes, like the recently launched James Watt telescope, we know that there are billions of galaxies, all made up of billions of stars. And no matter how far we look, we see no boundary. In time too, we see no limit. There is an eternal duration. Can that be grasped? Can we get a completely clear picture of it? I'm afraid not. Moreover, that principle is omnipresent, so it is in the farthest star as well as in ourselves. It's everywhere. And that makes sense, because if it were not somewhere, it wasn't boundless. Then there was a limit somewhere. And that it is eternal also makes sense, because if it had a beginning, then it was not boundless. And therefore, in Sanskrit it is called karana, the causeless cause, or the rootless root. In other words, it is the cause of everything that exists, but it itself has no cause. Is it the beginning? No, because every beginning has a cause. It is beginningless. Our intuition and instinct cannot accept an absolute starting point, and rightly so. This is already the case when children hear the hypothesis of the Big Bang, from which the universe would have emerged. The first question many of them usually ask is, what was there before the Big Bang? Our intuition, our inner knowing, tells us that a phenomenon must always have a beginning. But before that beginning, there must have been something. What is that something? Well, that's the primal force, that's the boundless principle. So, although we cannot know the boundless principle, our intuition tells us it must be there. And you see, although that boundless principle is beyond our understanding, we can still think about it, philosophize about it. So we can also answer yes to the question of whether we can know truth. Because we can develop in ourselves a realization, a kind of understanding within ourselves, through which we can get the concept of boundlessness, a concept of that absolute truth. We can understand it to some extent and live from it. Not a complete understanding, because then we would be boundless ourselves, we would no longer be a human, because a human being, like every being, is limited, but we can understand that limitless, that boundlessness, as an idea. And you see, although that principle is beyond our understanding, we can still think about it, philosophize about it, and then we can formulate within ourselves an affirmative answer to the question of knowing the boundless, knowing the absolute truth. We can develop a realization, a kind of understanding within ourselves through which we can have the concept of boundlessness, a concept of that absolute truth. And we can learn to live from it. We never will know the boundless completely, because then we would be boundless ourselves. And although we are the boundless in the deepest of our heart, we cannot express it. If you could express it, you would no longer be human, because a human being, like any being, is limited. But we can understand that boundless as an idea, a starting point. And it's very inspiring to do that, because focusing your mind on the unthinkable is a spiritualizing force, lifting you above your own little self. We can take that absolute truth as a basic starting point and test it in our lives and learn to experience it as true. Not in the dogmatic sense, but in the sense that we learn to understand more and more, so that more and more truth awakens in our consciousness, and we can solve all our problems and challenges with it. We must therefore draw for ourselves some conclusions from this idea of boundlessness. And the first, and by far the most important one, is the conclusion that there is an essential oneness underlying everything that exists. You could speak of that boundless principle as the one life that gives vistas of contemplation. And by life, here we do not mean a being, a human being, an animal, a god, or whatever, but the abstract, all-encompassing life. And if everything belongs to that one life, and belongs to is actually a wrong expression because we are in the depths of our hearts that one life, then there is universal brotherhood. Then universal brotherhood is a fact in nature. Then you and I, yes, all human beings, in the depths of their hearts are the same, sprung from the same source. And even this word source is actually a wrong word because that gives the impression that there is a physical point somewhere from which that life flows, like a river flows from a spring. But that life is everywhere. Every human comparison diminishes or mutilates or dwarfs the boundless. But yes, we have nothing but words to try to explain the expressionless per se. And it is not only humans who have come forth from that source, to use that word anyway, animals, plants, minerals, molecules, atoms, particles of atoms, but equally comets, planets, stars, galaxies, everything belongs to this boundless is. This boundless is the boundless. Do you already understand something of this other view on life? Just think about the boundless principle changes your life. And the problems that we briefly listed at the beginning of this talk are seen in a completely different perspective. When you look into the eyes of a fellow human being, you see yourself. Indeed, you find yourself reflected in all that surrounds you. Such a thought lifts you above yourself, makes you forget your little self and makes you experience your kinship with all that lives. Another conclusion one can draw from that idea of boundlessness is that any manifestation is by definition limited. And by manifestation or a phenomenon, we mean something that has appeared, a thing, to put it simply. And assuming the one life, it also means that every manifestation is alive. Also what materialistic science calls inorganic matter, so molecules, atoms, smaller particles, these too are living things. So there is no such thing as dead matter. We live on a living earth, in a living cosmos. We are composed of life. All phenomena, all manifestations are live. They are limited and alive. In this limitedness lies also the philosophical idea of illusion. I personally prefer the Sanskrit word Maya, not to appear learned, but because the word Maya indicates exactly what it is about. Maya is derived from the root ma, Sanskrit root ma, meaning to measure. Maya means the measured or what can be measured. So that doesn't mean that phenomenon doesn't exist. Of course it does exist. The earth, the sun, you and me, the flowers, the atoms that compose the flowers and our bodies, the cells formed by those atoms, etc., etc. It exists. But it exists temporary. It exists as a constraint. It has a beginning and therefore an end. In that sense, it is illusion. The illusory element is that we assume that it is reality. But it is not a reality. It has, in other words, a deceptive character. it's different from what it appears to be. In other words, there is a greater reality behind every phenomenon. All manifestations are limited and thus illusory. Also planets, suns, galaxies, such as our Milky Way, clusters of galaxies. They may exist for billions and billions of years. They may seem eternal to us. They nevertheless had a beginning, and therefore they will also have an end. And therefore there is no eternal God, no so-called creator. Although there are beings who are more developed than us humans, and you may call them gods if you like, but they too are limited in their manifestations and therefore subject to growth. They too have a beginning and therefore an end as a manifestation. And all those manifestations exist, as we briefly said, because there is a greater reality behind it. They exist because of some force, some power behind them, a force that works through them. What is that power? Well, that is ultimately life. Life per se. That's life, is the boundless, the causeless cause. That boundless is, as said, beyond our understanding, but still we can take it as an idea, as a concept, as a starting point in our lives. It can guide all our actions. In order to form at least some idea of this absolute truth, of this reality that precedes all limited being, you can imagine an ocean. For clarity, on the side you see that ocean is in quotes, so it is a metaphor. Every comparison diminishes the idea of the boundless principle, and our comparison is therefore also limited, and the picture we are painting is therefore certainly not perfect, but it might help anyway to imagine an ocean that has no shores, no bottom, no surface, only water, an endless amount of water, extending to the left and to the right, upwards, downwards, a boundless ocean of being. Every ripple in that ocean, every wave is a being, is an entity. It is therefore for a short or long time. It manifests itself for a short or long time, and then it is absorbed back into the ocean from which it was in fact never separated. And to make it even more precise, each ripple in turn consists of smaller ripples, smaller sub-waves, and you see there are no words to explain everything exactly. And those smaller waves within that larger wave are beings too, and in turn consist of even smaller waves, etc. Everything belongs to that boundless ocean of life. Everything is made up of the same water, has all the potency in itself that the ocean has. So you and I have everything the ocean has within it. All that boundless space contains of infinite powers, we also possess. So couldn't we solve our problems? We just need a new vision on life. Now, we say new vision, but actually that's not true. The vision is as old as mankind, yet it is even older than mankind. It is this vision, this approach to truth, which we now call Theosophia, the divine wisdom or the wisdom of the gods. Theosophia does not belong to any particular man or group or organization. It's the inheritance of all mankind. That's a very inspiring subject about which we can say much, But this evening we have no time for it. But in this lecture season, without any doubt, we will talk more about that universal Theosophia, the divine wisdom. Theosophia is the foundation of all the great religious and philosophical system of antiquity. All these schemes had the same basic principles, albeit sometimes worded by other names. So Lao Tse of China, some 2,500 years ago, spoke of Tao. And note, he said, the Tao that can be named is not the true Tao. Do you understand? Tao was his term for the boundless principle, and as soon as you limit it by giving it a name, it's no longer boundless. The ancient Vedic sage, the sage of India, spoke of Para-Brahman. Para-Brahman as being the boundless. And it means, Para-Brahman means beyond Brahman, beyond the highest deity that you could imagine. There's no name for it. And that's why they talked also about it as Tat. And Tat means simply that. And yet they say, Tat Tvam Asi. You are that. You are the boundless. We also find such a thought in the Quran, where the boundless is called Allah. And note, Allah is one, not hath he conceived, nor is he begotten. So you see, he, or rather it, is not conceived, so has always been there, and has not begotten, so has no created. Thus everything that exists, all beings have always been there. And therefore you also read in the Quran that Allah is closer than your jugular vein. He is so close because we are it. We are not begotten, so we have always lived and will live forever. Because, and this is very, very important, a very important conclusion that we can draw from the idea of the boundlessness. We, human beings, may have had a beginning as a manifestation, of course. We are born and we will die one day, but our essence, that what we really are, has always been there and will always be there. We are in our core indestructible. We are immortal in our deepest essence. Also, in other philosophical systems, in Buddhism, Gnostic Christianity, in the religion of ancient Greece, the religions of Africa, America, by the Stoics and by Plato and the Neoplatonists, and now for sure I'm not mentioning a lot of them, in all those religions, by all those philosophers and spiritual organizations, you find these thoughts expressed in other images or other metaphors, but once you've seen the idea, you will easily recognize in all those ancient teachings, in all those ancient myths, the idea of the boundless and man as being a part of it. And why do these old fairy tales and myths still appeal to us? Because deep down we know that we are an inseparable and indestructible part of the totality of life. Never was I not, says Krishna in the Bhagavad Gita, and never shall I cease to exist. And this, of course, applies to every being. That is the basis of the universal vision on your life. You are a building block in the eternal, boundless whole. Find that eternal element in you, and then wisdom will naturally flow into your consciousness. And this thought is as old as humanity. The only new thing about our course, Universal Wisdom, is that we have given these ancient thoughts a new look. A look that is easier for the 21st century man to understand, easier than the language of ancient times. And furthermore, we have tried to represent these thoughts in a logical structure, but we have not changed the basic ideas. Those basic thoughts are: everything is essentially boundless. All that is manifested is limited. All is essentially indestructible. There is an essential oneness underlying everything. We are therefore eternal pilgrims. We are increasingly on the way to become aware of this immortality. But we will talk more about that later after the break, when we will discuss the second and the third fundamental proposition with you. Well, there is now a break of 3 minutes, so you can ask your questions using the chat function or writing an email, and then I will try to answer those questions after the break. So see you in 3 minutes.